In 1909, a candy maker in central Pennsylvania signed a piece of paper that quietly transferred his entire fortune, every share of his chocolate company, every brick of his town, every acre of his farmland, to a school for orphaned boys. He had no biological children. He had already failed in business 3 times. He had nearly boarded the Titanic. And the document he signed that day is the reason that, more than a century later, no corporate raider, no private equity firm, and no foreign conglomerate has ever been able to buy the Hershey Company. They have tried. They keep trying. And every time, they run into the ghost of a man who decided that a chocolate bar should pay for a child's education in perpetuity. This is the story of Milton Hershey, the serial failure who built a utopia, gave it away, and accidentally created the most acquisition-proof company in American food history. Before there was a Hershey bar, there was a man who could not seem to finish anything. Milton Snavely Hershey was born in 1857 in rural Pennsylvania, into a Mennonite family fractured by his father's restless ambition. Henry Hershey was a dreamer who chased schemes, cough drops, oil wells, trout farms, and abandoned each one before it could pay. His mother Fanny was the opposite, severe, frugal, devout. Milton inherited both temperaments, and for the first half of his life it looked like his father had won. He left school in the 4th grade. He apprenticed to a printer and was fired after dropping his straw hat into the press. He apprenticed again, this time to a confectioner in Lancaster, and finally found something he loved, the chemistry of sugar, the alchemy of caramel. At 19, with borrowed money from his aunt, he opened his first candy shop in Philadelphia. It failed in 6 years. He moved to Denver. Failed, moved to Chicago. Failed, moved to New Orleans. Failed, moved to New York. Failed again, this time so badly that his suppliers seized his equipment and his own father refused to lend him train fare home. By 1886, Milton Hershey was 29 years old, broke, humiliated, and sleeping on relatives' floors. He had spent a decade proving he was exactly the kind of man his mother had warned him not to become. And then, with one last loan from that same aunt, he tried one more time, a caramel shop in Lancaster using a fresh milk recipe he had picked up in Denver. That recipe, and the stubbornness behind it, would change everything. The Lancaster Caramel Company worked. Hershey's fresh milk caramels, softer, richer, less brittle than competitors, caught the attention of an English importer who placed a massive order, and within a few years Milton was running a factory employing more than 1,000 workers. He was, by 1893, finally a wealthy man. That year, he traveled to the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago and saw a demonstration of German chocolate-making machinery. Most of his peers walked past it. Milton bought the entire exhibit. He had it shipped back to Lancaster and installed at a corner of his caramel factory, where he began experimenting with something almost no American had successfully mass-produced: milk chocolate. At the time, milk chocolate was a Swiss luxury, handmade, expensive, fragile. Milton believed he could make it cheap enough that a factory worker could buy a bar with pocket change. For 5 years he tinkered, ruining batch after batch, before landing on a formula that used a slightly soured milk process. The taste was tangy, distinct, and unlike European chocolate, and it would become the signature flavor that Americans now associate with chocolate itself. Then, in 1900, Milton did something his accountants thought was insane. He sold the entire Lancaster Caramel Company for $1 million, roughly $35 million in today's money, and bet the whole pile on chocolate. He kept only the chocolate equipment and a single audacious idea. He would build a factory in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by the dairy farms he needed, and around that factory he would build a town. The place he chose was Dairy Church, Pennsylvania, a stretch of farmland with no rail station, no town square, and roughly 1,200 residents. Milton bought the cornfield surrounding his birthplace and, in 1903, broke ground on what would become the largest chocolate factory in the world. But the factory was only the beginning. Milton had spent his early career in industrial cities, and he hated what he had seen: tenements, soot, child labor, saloons on every corner. He wanted his workers to live differently, so he hired landscape architects and laid out a town with curving tree-lined streets, brick houses with indoor plumbing, parks, a trolley system, a free public library, a department store, a zoo, and an amusement park. He banned billboards. He paid for the schools. He built a community center with a theater and a swimming pool that workers could use for free. The town was named Hershey, and by 1910 it was being written about in newspapers around the world as a kind of capitalist Eden. a place where the boss seemed genuinely uninterested in squeezing his employees. Critics called it paternalism, and they were not wrong. Milton owned everything. But during the Great Depression, when other industrialists were laying off workers by the tens of thousands, Milton did the opposite. He launched what he called the Great Building Campaign. A hotel, a sports arena, a community building, a stadium, a new high school, explicitly to keep his workers employed. When his foreman told him a steam shovel could replace 40 men on the hotel project, Milton reportedly replied, "Take that machine away, hire 40 more men." Hershey, Pennsylvania did not have a single resident on unemployment relief in the 1930s. Behind the public empire was a private grief. In 1898, Milton had married Catherine Sweeney, a sharp-witted Irish Catholic woman from Jamestown, New York. By all accounts, they adored each other. But Kitty, as he called her, suffered from a mysterious progressive illness, possibly a form of muscular dystrophy or multiple sclerosis, that gradually robbed her of the ability to walk. They tried every spa and specialist in Europe. They never had children. In the spring of 1912, the Hersheys booked a return passage from France aboard the RMS Titanic. Milton paid a $50 deposit on stateroom B65. A surviving check drawn on the Hershey Trust Company still exists. But business at the factory called him home early, and the couple boarded the German liner America instead, sailing days before the Titanic left Southampton. The check became one of the strangest artifacts in corporate history, a slip of paper that, had it been honored, would have erased the modern Hershey Company before it truly existed. Kitty died in 1915 at the age of 42 in a hotel suite in Philadelphia with Milton at her side. He never remarried. He was 57 years old, the richest man in the chocolate industry, and entirely alone. Years before Kitty died, the couple had made a decision that would outlive them both. In 1909, they founded the Hershey Industrial School, a residential institution for orphaned and disadvantaged boys, beginning with just 4 students in Milton's own farmhouse. Then, in 1918, 3 years after Kitty's death and quietly without public announcement, Milton transferred his entire personal fortune to the school's trust. He gave away every share of Hershey Chocolate Company stock he owned. The transfer was worth roughly $60 million at the time, well over $1 billion in today's money. Reporters did not learn about the gift for nearly 5 years. When asked why he had done it, Milton reportedly shrugged and said, "I have no heirs, so I decided to make the orphan boys of the United States my heirs." The mechanism was simple but radical. The Milton Hershey School Trust would forever own a controlling interest in the Hershey Company. Dividends from the chocolate business would fund the school. The school could not sell its controlling stake without permission from the Pennsylvania Attorney General. In effect, every Hershey bar sold anywhere in the world pays, in part, for the room, board, and education of children who have lost their parents or live in poverty. Today, the school enrolls more than 2,000 students K through 12 completely free. Its endowment exceeds $17 billion, making it one of the wealthiest pre-college institutions on earth. This is where the story bends into the present. Because the Milton Hershey School Trust controls the supermajority of voting shares in the Hershey Company, no acquirer can take the firm hostile. They have tried. In 2002, the Trust's board, worried about being too concentrated in a single stock, quietly put the company up for sale. Wrigley offered $12.5 billion. Nestle and Cadbury circled. The town of Hershey revolted. Workers marched. The Pennsylvania Attorney General sued to block the sale, arguing that the trust had a duty not just to its beneficiaries, but to the community Milton had built. A judge agreed. The deal collapsed. In 2016, Mondelez, the snack giant that owns Oreo and Cadbury, offered $23 billion. The trust rejected it within days. In 2024, Mondelez tried again. Same answer. Every time a banker runs the numbers on acquiring Hershey, they hit the same wall. A dead candy maker's deed, written in 1918, that effectively says no. Milton Hershey died in 1945 at the age of 88. He had outlived his wife by 30 years, his fortune by his own choice, and almost every contemporary who had once doubted him. He left no children, no mansion, no monument bearing his face. What he left was a town that still exists, a school that still operates, and a company that, uniquely among American food giants, cannot be sold to the highest bidder. The serial failure, who nearly went down with the Titanic instead, built something almost no founder ever manages, an empire that keeps refusing, on his behalf, to be devoured. Milton Hershey's story breaks almost every rule of the modern founder myth. He failed for a decade before he succeeded. He gave his fortune away while he was still alive, and quietly. He built schools instead of yachts, and he designed a corporate structure specifically intended to outlast his own greed and everyone else's. In an era where founders increasingly engineered dual-class shares to preserve personal control, Hershey did the opposite. He engineered control away from any single human being, including himself, and handed it to children he would never meet. Whether you call that paternalism, genius, or simply the most effective anti-takeover defense ever written, the result is the same. More than 115 years after he signed that deed of trust, every Reese's cup, every kiss, every Hershey bar still routes a fraction of its profit to a child somewhere in central Pennsylvania who needs a place to live. If you found this story as strange and as quietly radical as we did, subscribe to Boardroom Media. We dig into the founder biographies and corporate structures that explain why the companies you know became the companies they are, and why some of them, against all odds, refuse to be bought.